Okay, so today we're going to have a look at how you can properly implement an adaptive card extension for Microsoft Viva Connection, consuming Microsoft Graph in the backend using Azure Services. I'm Paolo, and I work in a company of my own called PiaSys.com. Let me first of all set the context of this demo, and then I will move to the actual code and show you how it works. So the overall idea of this sample application is to provide an expense report card inside Microsoft Viva Connection, because the target of this solution is to allow mobile users to upload their expense reports and being able to target a SharePoint Online document library with some metadata about the expense reports working on a mobile device and using Viva Connection. The backend of this solution, so of the card, is based on an Azure function, which makes available a REST API, a secured REST API, secured with open authorization and Microsoft Entra ID. And as I said, the target repository for storing the receipts and all the metadata is a document library in SharePoint Online with a custom content type and some custom fields. And last but not least, in the demo, we are also going to see how you can properly leverage the on behalf of flow to make it possible to upload the documents and to update the metadata of the documents in SharePoint on behalf of the user consuming the application in the front end. Here in the graphics, you can see how the initial card view looks like in the Viva Connection dashboard UI on the desktop and on the mobile, because I want to stress this information. Whenever you create a solution for Microsoft Viva Connection, your primary target is, in my opinion, the mobile experience. Very often we only see the desktop experience, and even in my demo, you will see the demo running in a desktop experience because it's easier when you do a demo in a community call like this one. But actually, the real main focus of a Viva Connection dashboard is to make the cards available to mobile users in an easy way through the Viva Connection app inside the Teams. And so in the lower right part of the screen, you can see how the card looks like in the mobile device, as well as you can see the quick view, which is the interface we use to upload the report, as well as what you see when you have uploaded the expense report and you get back a positive feedback for your action. So stop talking and let's move to the demo. Actually, I will keep on talking. Sorry, I'm sorry for you, but I will talk showing you the demo and showing you the code base of this demo. So let me switch first of all to the sample itself. One, I think, really important information for you is that the demo that I'm going to show you now is completely available on the adoptionmicrosoft.com site under the sample gallery. It is called Expense Reports ACE, and you can find it by searching for expense, for example, in the search engine of the solution gallery. From here, you can have access to the GitHub repository and you can download the whole source code of the front-end adaptive card extension, as well as of the back-end Azure function. That said, let's have a look at the demo from an end user perspective first, and then I will explain you how it works under the cover. So this is my ACE, my adaptive card extension running in the Viva Connection dashboard. And from here, I can click on the new expense or tap through a mobile device on the new expense button. And I will be prompted with a quick view where I can provide the information like the description of my expense report. So community dinner, because why not? And it will be a food and beverages category for my expense. It will be an expense of today. I can upload a receipt, so I can choose to browse for an item like I'm doing right here. And I need to close this one, and I can add the item, and then I can submit my expense. And as soon as I will have submitted my expense, I can go to SharePoint Online, and I can see that if I refresh this document library, I will have a new document, actually the image that I just uploaded, with all of the metadata that I configured through the adaptive card extension in the UI of the Viva Connection dashboard. So that's the demo experience and the user experience from an end user point of view. Now, let's dig into how it works and how we can do that using Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio. So first thing first, we have the SharePoint Framework solution. In this one, I'm using SharePoint Framework 1.18.2. And I have created an adaptive card extension. In this one, we can see I have the definition of my adaptive card. And inside the adaptive card, I'm simply relying on a service class that I created, which is exactly this one, the expense report service.ts file, which relies on the Azure Active Directory HTTP client type available out of the box in SharePoint Framework. Right now, I will not dig into the definition of this service class, but just to let you know, here we simply create an instance of the service class and then we initialize the URL of the target endpoint of the API endpoint that we want to use. But what is interesting now from a user experience point of view is that inside this ACE, in this adaptive card extension, in the home card view, which is the one with all of the coins, to be clear, we have a button which will activate the quick view that we want to use to do the creation, the upload of the actual expense receipt and report. The quick view that we use is defined like any regular quick view in an adaptive card extension. And in this one, we configure a bunch of settings and properties, like, for example, all of the text that we want to see in the UI so that we can have a localized user experience for our end users, as well as when we provide all of those settings in the get data method of the quick view, we can then rely on a JSON template, because all of the quick views in the SharePoint Framework adaptive card extension are based on a JSON file, JSON template based on the adaptive card schema. And in this one, with adaptive card schema version 1.5, I have 3 fields. As you can see, an input text to get the description, one choice set to get the categories, which are retrieved through data binding from the expense categories property that I have in my card view right here. These are just hard-coded, but you can eventually do data binding with an external list of categories. Then we have the input.date field, but we also have in the actions an action of type Viva action.selectMedia, which is the one you can use not only on a desktop experience, but also on a mobile device to do, for example, the upload of a picture that you have on your mobile phone, which could easily be the picture of a receipt that you want to upload while creating your expense report. And then I also have an action.submit button, which will be used to do the actual submission of the form. And when I will click on the action.submit, I will come here in the onAction method of my quick view, where I can see if the action triggered by the user is the Viva action.selectMedia, it means that the user is going to upload the receipt. And as such, aside from logging something, because I'm a developer and I love to do console log here and there because reasons, but just kidding, of course, I set the state of my adaptive card extension. And specifically, I get from the data of the action that was triggered, the description, the category, and the date, but I can also get the media section. And in there, for one or multiple files, because you can have eventually the upload of multiple files at once, I can get for each and every file the file name and the actual content of the file as a base 64 encoded string, so that when the user will actually trigger the submit button for the submit expense action, I can validate the input data, and then I can say, okay, relying on my expense report service, I can invoke a method to do the actual creation of the expense item. Sorry, I needed to drink. So here, these properties.create expense report is nothing more than a property that I have in my props type interface for the adaptive card extension, which defines the signature of a method that I have in my main adaptive card extension class. And in this method, I simply rely on the service, on the expense report service that I created in the onInit method of my ACE, and I invoke the create expense report method, providing an expense report object. The expense report object is just made of all of the metadata that we have seen before in the UI. And when we invoke this service, we rely on the HTTP client factory, which is a type provided by SharePoint Framework. And we create an instance of a client which will be secured through open authorization in order to be able to securely consume my backend API. My backend API is registered in Azure Active Directory right here. I have an application, which is the following one, where you can see that in the Expose an API section, I configured a unique ID for my API, which is exactly the one that I'm using here in SharePoint Framework to get a client for that one. So you provide the unique ID URI to tell SharePoint Framework for which API you want to have a client. And then in this section, I'm also declaring that I have a permission, which is called expense-report.create, which is a permission scope that is required in order to be able to securely consume my API. So right here in my SharePoint Framework solution, I'm declaring that from a Web API permission request point of view, I want to get access to my resource. This is the name of my application in Azure Active Directory. As you can see, this one pmp.expensereport.service, and this is the permission that I want to have. Sorry. So once I declare this information in the configuration, and once I do the get client, I can then use the client object and make a REST request targeting my API. So here, for example, I target the endpoint URL of my API, followed by /API/upload expense report, which will be the entry point for my target API. I can build an HTTP request, which will be made of a custom header declaring that I'm sending an application JSON file. And I'm defining the body of the request, which will be the JSON stringify of my expense report object. And then I simply make a post request targeting my service endpoint and providing the message, which will include the body, which is my JSON object. So this is the consumer part of the story. So the right way of doing it, following a good pattern, is to create the client object through the factory and eventually to use a service class that you can easily initialize in the onInit method of the SharePoint framework. And then you have to configure in the package solution the Web API permission request for your target API. Now, we move on the backend side, on the service side. So on the service side, we have, let me see if I can find it. Okay, we have also through the help of Swagger, the UI to test our backend API. And as you can see here, we have an upload expense report action, which accepts as an input a complex type, a JSON type made of all of the properties that we collected through the ACE. And it will accept a post request, and it requires authentication and authorization through a bearer access token. So when we do such a request in the UI, in fact, we can see that if I go back here and I create another request with F12, just to give you an idea of what is happening under the cover, I can say that this is another PMP dinner. We are full of food today, and still, no, let's say others, just for the sake of it. It will be still today, and let me get again the picture. Oh, that's nice. Let me see if I can sort it out. Oh, I need to have, let me do that. Let me move this guy here. Let me undock it so that we have room enough to do what we want to do. Sorry. So again, PMP community dinner, others. Let me get, it will be tomorrow, but I already know what I'm going to spend. Because reasons again, and I can add my receipt and I can send my expense. Okay, now that I'm doing that, if I will go back to my developer extensions, I can see under network that I made a request for the expense report. And this is the expense report that I submitted. And in the headers, we can see that we have an access token which has been provided by the SharePoint framework infrastructure out of the box because I made a request to create an AAD HTTP client and I provided the unique ID of my application. If I try to have a look to this access token just to see and just for the sake of understanding what's going on, we can see that this is a token for my API. And inside the token, we have the expense report.create permission scope. So we are providing this header, this custom header with the access token to the target API. And as such, in the target API, we have, first of all, in the program.cs of our Azure function, the configuration of a bunch of services using dependency injection, and in specifically in the functions worker default settings, we are configuring a couple of middleware classes. One will take care of the authentication and another one will take care of the authorization. I will not dig inside these two classes, but basically inside those two classes, we simply process the access token that we receive in order to identify if it is a good one, properly signed by an identity provider that we trust, which is Entra ID for me. And it has been issued by a tenant that we trust, which is the tenant I'm targeting. And then we can get the information about the user in the authentication middleware class. And we get the authorization scope in the authorization middleware so that we can then, inside the Azure function, authorize the user to consume the actual API. And in fact, in my Azure function, I have a custom attribute, which is called function authorize, where I declared that in order to be able to consume this API, I want to have a permission scope of type expense report.create, and if I will have it, I will allow the consumer to consume API. If not, I will simply return a 401 and I will deny the request. Plus the fact that I want to consume Microsoft Graph on behalf of the user. And that's why in my Azure app registration, I also defined from an API permissions point of view that I want to have a delegated permission. So under the name of the currently connected user, I want to be able to do files.readwrite and sites.readwrite.all. And I have granted those permissions to my application as a tenant admin. So when I am in the function, I get a request, I validate the authentication and the authorization of the user. I can then, through this property of my custom attribute, say, please create a new access token, which will allow me on behalf of the user to consume another API, which is Microsoft Graph. And in fact, in my local settings file, I defined that I have my application with its client secret, which is clearly secret, so you will not see it, and the permission scopes that I want to use to consume Microsoft Graph. And inside my function middleware, I will take care of creating an handshake, running an handshake with the on behalf of flow of Entra ID, so that inside my function, I can then say, give me the principal of the request, which can be a user or an application. In my scenario is a user, and give me the on behalf of token. This token will be an access token, and I will show you with a breakpoint that I can use to consume Microsoft Graph on behalf of the user. So let me show you what I mean. Let me go back to the Viva Connection dashboard and let me create another expense report. I'm almost running out of money with all of these expenses, but community dinner again, okay? Let me say that it's a travel expense this time, and it will be one for yesterday. Let me get the receipt, add it, and submit. Now here in this property, we have an access token. Let me copy it and let me press F5 to avoid having a timeout. Okay, if I'll go back here and create another instance of jot.ms, we can see that now this token is not anymore targeting my application. You see here the app ID is this one, and we are having a scope of expense report.create, while here we are consuming Microsoft Graph. So the target audience is now Microsoft Graph. This is the unique ID of Microsoft Graph. And from a permission scope perspective, we have the permission scopes for Microsoft Graph. So basically, we translated our access token from the one which was provided to consume our backend API into another one to consume Microsoft Graph, but still on behalf of the currently connected user. And as such, when I come here, I can use a graph client type that I created. In this graph client object, I simply provide in the constructor the access token that I want to use. And then in the save expense report file method, I get as an input the expense report object, as well as the file stream of the receipt that I want to upload. And here, just using the Microsoft Graph SDK version 5, I get a new graph client object. I get the target drive, meaning the target document library in SharePoint Online. I get the name of the file that I want to upload, and to make it unique, I use a GUID. And then I upload with a put async into the content of that file inside the drive via the graph client. So basically, I do the upload of the file. I get a reference to the just uploaded file. And still using Microsoft Graph, I update the fields of that item in the target list, which is the library, using a set of fields, which are the custom fields that I have in my custom content type. And as such, I can do the upload and I can set the fields in the target content type. Again, from a patterns point of view, we need to have an Azure function, which will then be hosted on Azure indeed. And in the Azure function, we can rely on a middleware to do the authentication and the authorization, so that we can easily in the function rely on an attribute to do the authorization filter and eventually to benefit of the on behalf of flow. The on behalf of flow will give me back an access token based on the permission scope that I have configured in my application settings. And then using the Graph SDK, I can do whatever I need to do in order to upload my file and process all of the metadata and all of the other stuff. So this is to give you an end-to-end view about what you can do in the right way using an adaptive card extension as a front end, either from a mobile or a desktop device, and a REST API based on an Azure function in the back end. Just a few more things, and then we can go back to you, Chris. Few useful links. The first one is the sample in the adoption.microsoft.com sample gallery. The second and the third one are basic guidance documents about how you can create an adaptive card extension with sample framework and how you can consume Microsoft Graph API using the Graph SDK version 5. I think that's all for me. Thank you, and back to you, Chris.